A Saga Born of Ash.
Mhm.
Perhaps this one, she thought as she blew the dust from the cover. At long last, perhaps this one will let me see far enough to catch a glimpse of my lost love, my husband. Groa, the seer, inspected the tome that she had just discovered. This was the one she had been hunting for quite some time. Cracking open the tome, she allowed herself a slight smile, knowing that the runes inside held the power to augment her already substantial prophetic talents, and perhaps allow her to, after all this time, glimpse the location of her husband, Arvando. Groa's search for her lost husband had been ongoing now for some time. Already a gifted seer, she hoped to lengthen the scope of her sight. By hunting down and collecting tomes of arcane wisdom, she had traversed the realms, hunting for such tomes, each one full of ancient knowledge. And, with each runic passage spoken aloud, her powers of sight did grow. But she never glimpsed what she was truly after, the location of Arvando. The last time Groa had felt her husband's embrace was moments before he journeyed on a quest by the side of Thor, the mighty son of Odin. Arvando had never returned from that quest. All Groa knew was that, after suffering from a bout of frostbite, Thor attempted to carry Arvando home from Vanaheim across a bitter and icy stream in a basket on his back. But somewhere in the tundra, Thor lost Arvando. Thor returned home with only an empty basket. He knew not what fate befell Groa's true love. Although her sought-after prize continued to elude her, Groa did glimpse many things inside each tome. Soon, the search for her husband became a pursuit for knowledge itself, and over the years, Groa had collected her discoveries in an endless library of arcane wisdom. As her powers grew, so did her reputation for prophecy. Even one so powerful as Thor's father, Odin, the All-Father, came to rely on Groa's foresight. Groa didn't know why, but back in the safety of her library, she felt that this latest tome was somehow special. Her prophecies had grown to allow her to see longer and farther than anyone before or since, and she felt this latest tome would surely tip the scales of her talents to allow her to see what she so desperately desired. And now that she held it in her hands, she could crack it open, recite the runic incantations inside, and claim the tome's power for herself. Groa lifted the book's cover and spoke the runic phrases aloud, her voice echoing with lingering hope and divine magic. As she spoke the runes aloud, she shut her eyes tight, her mind flooded with images. But the whereabouts of poor Arvando didn't come with the flood. Instead, Groa grimaced as her mind raced with horrible, disastrous visions. She saw the worlds plunge into a bitter, 3-year winter. She saw the sky split, and the realms began to tremble and quake. She saw a horrible terror emerge with a flaming sword, and an enormous, beastly wolf rampaging across the countryside as he grew to consume the very sun. She saw the deadliest of monsters and the worst of gods at each other's throats. And, in the events leading up to it all, she also saw a pale, white ghost from a distant land and his young son, somehow intertwined in this terrible prophecy. Back in Asgard, realm of the Aesir gods, Odin's remaining eye twitched. He felt the ripples of Groa's prophecy come crashing across the realms. Ragnarok, Odin whispered to himself with a tremble, and then, lifting himself from his throne, the All-Father hissed, Groa. The unanswered cries of his terrified child echoed across the winter woods. Tears, falling from the face of this realm's newest widow, poked almost unnoticeable holes in the blood-spattered snow. The man's body lay in a heap at the foot of a great, fallen tree, his head staring back at him from where it landed a dozen yards over, mouth still agape in panic and horror at the bloody consequences for simply crossing the creature's path. And the creature responsible for this nightmarish scene lumbered on, its terrible mind not caring for what it had just wrought in the slightest, not satisfied in the least with its freshest kill, turning, instead, to seek yet another target for its unquenchable rage. There was a name for such creatures in the Nine Realms. Draugr, a twisted horror cursed to wander Midgard with but a single thought, propelling its husk of a body to continue to drag its feet across the Norse wilds. But Like many before him, this Draugr was not born to the violence and anger that it now spread to anyone it encountered. This Draugr once had a life, and a family, and a name. Now, only Before the change, the monster had been a man, and he spent his life like most men of his time, fighting for food, refuge, and survival in the Norse wilds. With a small band of others who had been thrust together by necessity, they managed a life. The man attributed it to one simple rule: never yield. No matter how unforgiving the dangers of the woods became, perseverance, through the will of the goddess Freya, was all they needed to make it through. They formed a community. The man had even found love inside his makeshift family and a chance to start a real family of his own. Bringing a baby into such an uncertain world was not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but their small community rallied around the child to help protect and nurture this precious new life. The challenges remained. Thieves and bandits still managed to steal what meager offerings the group had managed to assemble for themselves. Other clans challenged the group's leaders for dominance and tried to break them apart, but their unwillingness to yield to any threat got them through and kept them together. Even faced with uncertain dangers, for a while, times were good. One morning, as the sun illuminated the sky, the shrieks of Odin's ravens on their daily swoop across Midgard woke the man. He roused his loyal group and set off east, through a patch of dark wood near their latest camp. Normally, they would have taken a day's journey around the woods, as heading straight through brought the chance of even more hidden danger. But their drinking horns had already run dry, and scouts had heard the babbling of a brook in the clearing just past the tree. Their thirst would claim them before they made the days-long journey around potential harm. Entering the woods, the man and his warriors kept a sharp look, but the trees were quiet enough that they could hear the babbling brook on the other side. As they continued deeper into the woods, the babbling grew louder. So loud, in fact, it began to seem like laughter. Low, guttural bellows, coming not from the far side of the trees, but from above. The man craned his neck toward the laughter, just as the gang of bandits swiftly descended from their branches. In an instant, they were upon the small group. He had led his clan directly into their trap. The man drew his sword as he faced the largest bandit and growled, "You will not break us." But the bandit was larger, swifter, and more desperate than the man himself. He matched each blow, and the two fought to a standstill. "I will not yield. I will not cease. You cannot win." The man spat through the blood pooling in his mouth. The bandit let out that same slow, low, guttural laugh. "But I already have. Look." With a gesture, the bandit king motioned for the man to turn. He had been so focused on besting the bandit king that he hadn't seen the dozens more bandits crawling from their hiding places in the trees. They had slain his warriors and captured his women and children. As the pounding heartbeat of the battle softened in his ears, he heard the cries of his wife and child as they struggled against the chains of the bandit horde. All seemed lost, but the man's resolve had seen him through worse. As the pure rage welled inside him like a fortress fire, he turned to deliver the final blow and bellowed, "Never But he never got the chance. The odds, at last, were too great. The blade from the bandit king pierced his heart before he took another step. What an odd feeling, the man thought. He felt peaceful, as if he were dreamily slumbering by a warm fire. But wait, something felt off. He was doing something important. Had he been interrupted? Hazy questions swam in his mind. As the Valkyrie approached, he had died a warrior's death, and as such, he was entitled to a warrior's reward. An eternity of battle and feasting in the great halls of Valhalla, in the presence of the All-Father Odin himself. The Valkyries were sent to warriors on their final breath to deliver such rewards and escort the fallen. As the Valkyrie drew closer, the man felt her pull, and he began to yield his claim to the realm of mortal men. As he did, he studied his new companion. Her long, perfectly braided hair, her ornate shield, and shining blade. Wait. A blade. The man remembered. The blade of the Bandit King was about to pierce his heart. This must be a trick. Some spell of confusion meant to distract him from the battle. He could not be at the foot of his final reward. He could not leave his wife and child on the earthen plane. He could not. He would not yield to the specter. Never yield. He shouted with such ferocity. The Valkyrie actually shifted her balance. As the man forced his heavy body to stand, the Valkyrie remorsefully drew her sword. He lunged at her then, with all the strength and anger that he never had the chance to deliver to the Bandit King, and the two locked in combat. The Valkyrie saw that she had no choice but to best this confused, fallen warrior. The man saw only the Bandit King. As their swords clashed, their fight grew, hotter and hotter with the power of the Valkyrie and the burning rage of the fallen man. So hot did the conflict become that a ball of pure white flame began to form around the two. The Valkyrie remained unaffected, but the man was just a mortal man. The fire surrounded him, melting the dirt at his feet, causing him to sink into the very earth. The flames stripped away his skin and fused armor to flesh and bone. Blow by blow, the fire burned away the man he was. Gone was his life, his happy days, his wife, his child. Gone now was the man who would never yield. In his place stood a creature of pure warrior's rage, a blight on the realm of men, whose thirst for vengeance would never cease. Where the man once stood, now only a monster of rage, a Draugr, remained. The clanging of the hammer and chisel grew more harried as sunset drew near and the bitter winds of early winter intensified. Brick after flawless brick, the elder giant, Thalmor, kept working, unbothered by the falling darkness. Though none in the Nine Realms surpassed his knowledge of stone and masonry, Thalmor's task of completing a wall to guard Jotunheim remained nigh impossible. Thor's malevolent crusade was nearly at the Jotun's doorstep, but even at this breakneck pace, the master stonemason never sacrificed his product. Thalmor simply continued his work in darkness, calculating the most formidable angles for his bricks, and crafting them with a measured ringing of his venerated hammer and chisel. Constructing massive walls to surround the ornate structures of Jotunheim was the last-ditch effort of his people to protect their precious home. Thalmor knew the responsibility resting on his sore shoulders. But the fuel of peril can only push one so far. Untold miles away, deep in an underground cavern in the realm of Svartalheim, two dwarves sat silently at opposite corners of a workshop in disarray. All manner of hammers, tongs, chisels, and weapons hung from the walls, among wooden barrels and iron chests filled with carved trinkets and rare jewels. Empty flagons of ale littered the ground. In the center of the chamber, a great iron anvil and forge stood dark and cold, its fires long extinguished. The thinner of the two dwarves stood up and spoke, his voice frail in the dark. What have we wrought? What calamity have we unleashed on this world? The other dwarf, square-jawed and stouter in frame, remained silent, but then smashed his heavy boot on the stone floor, crushing an unusually large spider. Are you still on about that, Sindri? It's been almost 30 years, and yet you still fret over news of every slain giant. Even before he opened his eyes, Atreus knew he wasn't going to like what he saw. For one thing, he was moving. Fast. Carried by something that was rocking his body clumsily back and forth. The sensation was not unlike what he imagined sailing must be like, being thrown this way and that at the whim of the waves. But Atreus had never been sailing. In fact, he had never wandered further than the woods immediately surrounding his home. There, he knew every tree, every path, every inch of the forest. But as he strained to open his eyes, he saw the treetops above him rushing past. He recognized not a one. His eyes opened now. Atreus confirmed that he was not being carried by the waves, but by his father, Kratos, who was rushing him through the unfamiliar wilds at impossible speeds. As Kratos' face came into focus, so did something else. Pain. Sharp, hot, and damp. Inside the enormous hall, a great iron bell rang out, its deafening gong echoing across the immense stone walls of the chamber. Treachery, an impossibly deep voice bellowed, shaking the very ground. We have been deceived. Odin and Tyr stepped backwards from the 6 colossal thrones before them, as the air in the room grew heavy and warm. They shielded their ears from the bell's deafening rings and stepped backward in retreat. The giants erupted from their thrones in unison, intent on capturing or crushing their unwanted guests. Enormous hands descended toward the pair of gods, as Odin and Tyr turned to flee, clearly outmatched by this host of giant foes. A hand with fingers the size of tree trunks reached to grasp the gods, but there was a sudden flash of light as Odin transformed into a silvery hawk and flew deftly between the fingers of the enraged Jotun. Skirmishes between these 2 tribes of gods continued unabated for centuries. Eventually Odin, the proudest and most cruel of all the Aesir, sought to put an end to it. He was sure it could be settled quickly once his forces were in place, so he gathered a massive army and marched them toward Vanaheim, determined to wipe out the Vanir once and for all. Fear and deference cloaked the landscape as they stomped across it, for the King of Gods had never lost a battle, and he surely never would. The massive throng of troops backed up well past the horizon as they descended in multitudes upon the lush gardens and bountiful fields of Vanaheim. Yet, as these soldiers landed, they were curiously falling back 2 steps for every advance they made. We must end their magic, snarled Thor to his brothers in battle. It may already be too late, replied Heimdall, with his especially impressive vision focused on the front lines. The Aesir hadn't ever encountered so many Vanir gods casting Sather spells at once. They were unexpectedly formidable in combat. Odin hid his involvement in their creation from the travelers, leading to a test of worth. The writings would then reveal the warrior's true calling, to find the legendary lost realm of Jotunheim. They would then live out the rest of their lives scouring the realms for information on the hidden entrance to the land of the giants, sharing whatever they find with their worthy kin via messenger ravens in a language known only to other true travelers. True, it filled their hearts to live a life with purpose. Of course, not a one knew the truth of their purpose: to fuel the obsession of an all-powerful madman. Year after year, Odin's search continued, but no matter how many giants he sent Thor to torture, no matter how many lost warriors he had at his disposal, he still could not glean the location of the missing path to Jotunheim. His madness had grown beyond his control. In his unyielding quest to find Jotunheim, he was destroying the 9 realms.